right, good evening, everybody. If I can just get you to find your seats, we're going to get this evening started. I am Sarah McKenzie, President of the Medicine Hat District Chamber of Commerce, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening for the 43rd federal election and tonight's forum in the riding of Medicine Hat-Cardston-Warner. We have several Chamber of Commerce directors joining us this evening, and so if I could just get each of you to wave your hand. I believe Tammy Sweeney, Reagan Weeks, Tracy Newlett, Marcus Campbell, Brett Pudwell, thank you guys all for being here. The Chamber is a nonpartisan organization representing over 800 active members ranging from one-person home-based businesses to large corporations. And we are committed to assisting each of our members through our connections, support, and influence. As an established organization in this community since 1900, we take great pride in our responsibility to strengthen our region and our economy. As part of this role, we seek out answers and solutions to the questions and concerns of importance to our membership. Our goal for these forums is to provide the voting public with an opportunity to find out directly from candidates how they will represent their constituents on a variety of issues. The questions this evening are focused on our federal vote prosperity, along with questions submitted to us in advance. We will also be accepting written questions from the audience this evening. If you are submitting a question, please hold up your hand during the debate, and questions will be collected by one of our Chamber Board directors who are standing out in the theater. The directors also have paper and pencils if need be. We ask that any questions submitted be addressed to all candidates. Any questions that are specific to any one candidate will not be selected in this evening's forum. The questions may or may not be included in our program this evening at the discretion of the scrutineers and moderator and dependent on our time. We hope that this provides you with an opportunity to gain the knowledge you need to make an informed choice when you cast your ballot. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Ken Cobley. Ken has been President and CEO of the Alberta Chamber of Commerce since February 2005. Ken has developed the ACC's profile on a strong, consistent voice for Alberta business issues over the past 14 years, speaking for the Federation of Chambers of Commerce, which represent over 25,000 businesses in Alberta. Provincial, national, and international media regularly turn to the ACC for comment on business-related issues. Ken has a background in accounting, serving as a member of the Provincial Board of Certified General Accountants Association of Alberta and as president in 88-89. In the recognition of his service, Ken was honored as one of the 100 CGAs who have made a difference. He is a recipient of the Queen's Golden Jubilee Citizenship Medal and was recognized as one of Alberta's 50 most influential people in 2016 by Alberta Venture magazine. Ken spent 2 decades on the Municipal Council of the town of Beaumont and was mayor of the town for 12 years. He continues to live in Beaumont with his wife Peggy and has 4 children and 5 grandchildren. Welcome, Ken.
Well, good evening, everyone. And before we get started, I pre-apologize. I came back on a flight from Montreal on Sunday night with 120 of my closest friends, and I got one heck of a head cold. So I'm going to use that as an excuse if I make any mistakes tonight. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate tonight's forum. For disclosure purposes, the Medicine Hat District Chamber of Commerce contacted all registered candidates who appeared on the Elections Canada website as of the official deadline set by Elections Canada, and invited them to participate in this forum. Here tonight are the 4 candidates who accepted the Chamber's invitation to participate. We'd like to remind the audience that there is no photography, audio, or video recording permitted at tonight's event, except for those who have requested prior permission. We also ask that you refrain from participating in the forum in any other way than by quiet observation. Please hold any applause or comments until the end of the forum, unless invited to do so. And just to not to find a point on, if anybody interrupts the candidate while they're speaking, I will reset their timer so that they get full time. If anybody applauds during the candidate speaking, unfortunately, that particular situation, we will allow the timer to run, okay? Please hold any applause or comments until the end of the forum unless invited to do so. This is for your benefit, as we have a lot of information to get through this evening, and any interruption will lessen the time we have available to hear from our candidates. If you have a cell phone with you, please make sure that the ringer is turned off so that there are no interruptions that will distract from the questions or of the moderator or answers of our candidates. So, without any further ado, I'd like to invite the audience to join me in welcoming to the stage the 2019 federal candidates for the riding of Medicine Hat-Cardston-Warner. First, Ms. Shannon Hawthorne, representing the Green Party of Canada. Here we go. So apparently we don't have a Green Party candidate here tonight. All right, let's try this again. Mr. Harris Kirshenbaum, Liberal Party of Canada. Mr. Glen Motz, Conservative Party of Canada. Mr. Andrew Nelson, People's Party of Canada. And Ms. Elizabeth Thomson, New Democratic Party of Canada. Okay, so welcome candidates. Before we begin tonight's debate, I would like to take a moment to explain the rules to which all of the candidates have agreed upon by signing the Chamber's Memorandum of Understanding. Each candidate, in alphabetical order, will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement before we proceed into the question and debate portion of tonight's event. On the topics presented, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to a question that will be asked to all candidates. Follow-up questions may be asked, to which you will have also 1 minute to respond. Following the question and answer portion of each topic, I may open the floor to a maximum of 4 minutes of debate, during which time no candidate may speak for more than 30 seconds consecutively. Candidates must be given the floor by myself as your moderator this evening. In each instance where a candidate exceeds the permitted time for comment, I will interrupt and remind both the candidate and the audience of the expiration of the time limit by stating, "I'm sorry, candidate, your time is up." Finally, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement at the end of the program. This forum is structured in a manner that allows equal opportunity for all candidates to plans and the effect they will have on business in our community and Canada. While the order in which candidates answer was randomly assigned, we have ensured that each candidate has an equal opportunity to give the starting response. None of the candidates have any advanced knowledge of tonight's questions, but they were given a list of potential topics that we will be discussing. So, to start off this evening, each candidate will have 2 minutes to deliver an opening statement. And I'm going to start with Mr. Kirshenbaum.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. As you know, I was the final candidate nominated by the Liberal Party in Alberta. We made our nomination quite close to the wire, but it is my pleasure to be here. My purpose in taking this position in Medicine Hat is to provide a place for those in this riding who look at a track record of the last 4 years of an astonishing Prime Minister directing leadership around the world and across this country, with the use of a cabinet of astonishing members of support who have led us to a really enviable position in a difficult world. That track record is worthy of support, in my view. Our position worldwide is better than it's ever been. Our national debt compared to GDP is a fraction of what it is in other G7 countries. Our positions on environment continue to lead and will get stronger as we go forward, and therefore I present to you the platform of the Liberal Party as nothing but a series of strengths for your serious consideration when it comes to Election Day. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Motz.
Thank you. I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this event and for our, my fellow candidates for being here. Friends, Canada is at a crossroads. Canadians are worried about their future. They are losing hope, and their dreams are not being fulfilled, are not being realized. And they have lost hope and they need help. Justin Trudeau has repeatedly demonstrated that he is unable to deliver hope or help. He has committed already in this campaign to continue his reckless spending, to increase our national deficit at a pace that cannot be sustained. Scandals will continue to follow, and it is not sustainable. But there is hope, friends. There is hope. We have a conservative government with a principled leader who has a plan, and that plan is to give you hope, to make sure that an environment is created where businesses can prosper, where you can prosper, where we can get out of the way and let you keep more of your money in your pocket. You'll hear all sorts of promises tonight from my fellow candidates, platforms from their leaders, who, if it actually follows through, will continue to rack up huge deficits and will continue to burden our country with debt and increase your taxes, bar none. I'm your conservative candidate, and I'm excited to champion the amazing people and businesses in this riding, because you deserve to get ahead. You deserve to not continue to pay taxes recklessly to a government that's out of control. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. Next, we have Mr. Nelson's opening statements.
Good evening, everyone. Exciting times, isn't it? The PPC is the People's Party. It is a grassroots movement. I have never in my life before been ever motivated to run in politics, but for the dismal history that we've had over the last 4 years, I couldn't sit by any longer. We need change in this country. We can't allow it to keep going the way it's been done. The big parties, it seems like every election or every other election, all we're doing is switching from one to the other. And voting to get someone out, it doesn't work for us. So we need a party that can offer some real change, and that's the PPC. You're not going to hear of any spending promises from our party. We're promising to cut. We're going to cut the things that matter to Canadians. We're cutting out foreign aid. We're cutting out corporate welfare. We're cutting out spending that doesn't need to be in this country. And we're going to take that money and we're going to reinvest it in the seniors, the veterans, First Nations, the homeless, the drug addiction problem that we have in this country. As long as we've got people in our own country that are in need, we have no right to send Canadian taxpayers' money overseas. That needs to stay here to help our own people. And that is the push forward for the People's Party. We represent policies that represent freedom, personal responsibility, fairness, and respect. And I'm here this evening to get your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Next, we have Ms. Thomson.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. I'm going to start by honoring and acknowledging that we're currently located on the traditional lands of Treaty 7 and neighbor to Treaty 4, as well as the traditional lands of Métis Region 3. I'm Elizabeth Thomson. I was born and raised in Medicine Hat. I'm a proud Medicine Hatter, and I'm glad to be back here working, living, and being a part of this amazing community. The New Democratic Party of Canada has dedicated our platform to making your life more affordable. And our key piece of our platform is universal pharma care, because no one should have to choose between rent and medication that keeps them alive. No one should have to choose between food on their family's table and medication that keeps them alive. We're also dedicated to changing the electoral reform, or creating electoral reform, because I know there's so many people that are frustrated with the democratic system in Canada, and they're frustrated with parties going back and forth and endless scandals and tit-for-tats of scandals of leaders, and feeling that their vote doesn't count. So we're dedicated to creating a mixed member proportionate representation, which I hope I get the chance to talk about a little bit later, because I'm a bit of a policy nerd. And I know people often ask the NDPs, how are you going to pay for it? It's the constant question, isn't it? But we're dedicated to taxing the ultra wealthy. We're talking about people that are worth more than $20 million. So if you're worth more than $20 million and you're in this room right now, I'm sorry, we're going to tax you. But if you're not, we're not going to increase your taxes. And we're going to dedicate to protecting the environment. And personally, I'm going to make sure that I'm working for you. I'm a representative for Medicine Hat-Cardston-Warner, not somebody that's just going to follow along with what the party says and what the leader says. I have a brain of my own. I can do the research myself and develop an opinion that benefits the people of Medicine Hat. So please vote for the New Democratic Party because we're the only party that is in it for you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomson. And thanks to all the candidates for staying within your 2 minutes. Okay, before we get into the hot topics for the evening, please outline how your personal experience, skills, and expertise will make you an effective government representative for this riding. You each have 1 minute for your response. And I'm going to begin with candidate Motz.
Thank you for the question. I have served this community for 35 years. And when you really appreciate and understand what service is all about, it's difficult to walk away from. Because service is about you. It's not about the individual. It's not about yourself. It's about doing what you can to add value to the lives of others. I have farming background. I grew up on a ranch in south central Alberta. I know the value of hard work. I know the value of working hard for your dollar. And I understand people. I understand and listen to the issues that are important to this riding. And I've demonstrated over the last 3 years of having the honor of serving you that I'm more than capable of delivering on the issues that impact this riding and impact this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to candidate Thomson.
Thank you. As I said, I am originally from Medicine Hat, born and raised. My family is rooted in this community. I'm second-generation Medicine Hatter, and my family is a significant family in this community that helped rebuild this country, or rebuild this community. And my ancestors were construction workers and farmers in this community. But personally, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Women's Studies and Human Rights with minors in Anthropology and Sociology. I have a Bachelor of Law, and I also have a Master's of Law in International Human Rights and International Criminal Law. What all that means is that I know how to get into the nitty-gritty details of stuff that shouldn't bother ordinary Canadians, that I can analyze things and I have the knowledge to do that and work for the community to be the best representative that I can, rather than relying on what other people may say. Currently, I work at Samus Immigration, so I have connections in many, many capacities in this community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, candidate Kirshenbaum.
Thank you. My career work has primarily been as a communicator. I was director of national advertising for a large Japanese electronics firm for a decade and a half. But looking up here, you might see another old white guy. The fact is, growing up as a minority member, my family is Jewish, this gives us a perspective on the way things really are amongst those who are not part of the great majority. I'm also a gay man in my 60s, lucky enough to have a partner I've lived with for 22 years. We are a tight family unit, and we consider ourselves part of the community as that group that we are. I've worked in arts, I've worked in business, I've worked in politics, and I think I bring a unique perspective based on those traits to the possibility of representing you in Ottawa.
Thank you. And finally, candidate Nelson.
Since I left the forces in the early 80s, I've been in the private sector in construction, worked my way up from a carpenter to a superintendent. I handle large projects, 100 million and plus. I know how to do the nitty-gritty. I know how to keep projects on target, on time, on budget, and I won't handle taxpayers' money any differently. I'm tired of watching the waste that we have in our governments, and it needs to be controlled. I'm an ordinary Canadian. You don't see all these credentials behind me, but I'm just like every one of you, and I listen. And I'm here to represent each one of you as an ordinary Canadian. It's time we did politics differently in this country.
Thank you. Now that we've heard opening remarks from the candidates, we'll move on to the question and debate portion of tonight's evening. We've structured our questions on 7 themes: taxation, regulation, trade, small business, connected Canada, skills, and pharmacare. So the first question is on taxation. What steps can be taken in order to create a tax system that is fair, efficient, and modern? I'm going to start off with candidate Nelson. You have 60 seconds.
Okay, our tax system is pretty simple. We're going to take it from 5 categories just down to 2. People that make their first $15,000 is not taxed. That's tax-free. From $15,001 to $100,000, 15%. Anything you make over $100,000 is taxed at 25%. That'll save the average Canadian $7,500 a year. And I'd like to hear what the other parties are going to do to keep that money in your pocket.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to candidate Motz.
Thank you. Well, it's obvious over the last 4 years, we understand what taxation is all about, don't we? We've been taxed to death in this country. And a tax system, our tax system, needs to be independently reviewed. It is no longer equitable, it's not fair, and it certainly isn't modern. And one of the things that we do have to do from a business perspective is repeal the job-killing taxes that occurred to small business in 2017. We were able to, with your help, repeal or get a lot of them reversed or backed off on. But there is a considerable amount of corporate and business tax that are killing our businesses and killing our industry in this country. And we need to repeal the mess that is occurring right now. And we need to start by being and looking at our tax system and creating a tax system that is modern and fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move to candidate Thomson.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, the kind of pivotal part of our taxation proposal is taxing the ultra wealthy, those that are worth over $20 million. Is anyone in here worth more than $20 million? Don't think so. We're also going to be addressing the small business family tax so that it's going to be easier for people to be able to transfer their family business through generations. We're going to go up after the big corporations that are currently not paying their fair share to Canadian society. That's Google, Facebook, Amazon, that should be paying. And we're also going to make the tax evasion laws stricter so that people that are evading taxes are actually paying their fair share and being prosecuted if need be. On an accountability note, my fellow candidate Motz voted down a tax evasion law.
Okay, and we'll go to candidate Kirshenbaum.
Thank you. The proposed Liberal tax plans going forward are published, in fact, unlike other parties who have not put their plans together and made them accessible. The primary thing that concerns most of us is the base tax rate rises to $35,000. All income beneath $35,000 is non-taxable. It then scales and continues, but the emphasis on increased tax revenue is in the wealthiest sectors without drastic cuts to the services on which we all depend. We need those services, especially in the areas where jobs are in crisis, in those areas, which is everywhere, in those areas where, in post-secondary education, where student loans are crippling. Students who graduate and try to go forward in their lives, a new program takes great relief to their situations on a daily basis, starting immediately in a new government.
Thank you. So, continuing on this theme, if elected, would you and your party commit to appointing a royal commission to conduct a comprehensive review of the Canadian tax system, guided by the principles of tax competitiveness, simplicity, and fairness? Why or why not? And I'm going to start off with candidate Motz.
Well, thank you. I think I've made it very, very clear, and our party leader has certainly made it very, very clear that Canada's tax system is in desperate need of an independent, thorough review. It is since the 1960s, since the last time that was done. Things have changed. In order to remain competitive in a competitive world, we need to ensure that our tax system is also that it is fair and it is competitive, and it properly represents the changes that have occurred in our particular Canadian marketplace. To suggest otherwise is irresponsible. To continue on with where we've gone and what we're doing, recklessly spending and then taxing you as individuals or you as business to support out of control spending is not an answer to anything.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
That's a difficult question because Canada has an obsession with inquiries and reviews, and we spend a lot of money doing commissions and reviews and inquiries. Sure, the tax system could be improved. I'm not quite sure, honestly. On our platform, I don't think it includes a comprehensive review, but there is definitely room for improvement. There always is room for improvement. Does it require a large, comprehensive, multi-$1,000 review? I'm not quite sure. But I think that if we were to create a panel to review taxation, it needs to include ordinary Canadians. Not all businesses, not all business owners, not all corporations, not all politicians. Ordinary Canadians need to be included in that conversation.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
I think a royal commission is out of the question, in my own personal opinion. They are expensive, they are slow, they are time-consuming, and it just takes years to get anywhere. There is a revision of the tax program in the Liberal Party's proposed agenda, and I think it's sensible. I think it is progressive, and it addresses the needs of Canadians in today's world. It is not what it was 10 years ago, and it does not lead to stunning deficits. The deficits that Canada faces, you know, it's very easy, really, to look at a graph of 40 years of government. 30% of that time we were under conservative governments. Those conservative governments ran up 70% of the standing deficit that our country faces. They don't have the right answers either. It's a process, it takes time, it develops over time, and with your support, it gets better. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson.
Well, Maxime Bernier has been very clear on this. The answer is yes. We think it needs to have a review. That's one of the first things we're going to do. We think that there are a number of steps that can be taken here, but as you've been listening to, the other parties want to spend. We think it's time Canadians got to keep more of their own money. It's not time to spend. We've had enough deficits. Over the last 4 years, we've had deficits coming out of our ears. We had a promise the budget was going to be balanced in 2019. Didn't happen. We're giving money away to foreign countries like it's water. We can't continue to do that. It's time to keep the money here at home. So yes, we will be doing a review.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm now going to open it up to open debate for a maximum of 4 minutes. If you want to get into debate on this issue, raise your hand. I will recognize you in order that you've raised your hands. You're only permitted 30 seconds at a time. If time permits, we will go back. I have Candidate Motz. Are there any other candidates? Thomson, Nelson, Kirshenbaum. Okay, Candidate Motz.
Thank you. In 30 seconds, it's pretty tough to explain how the last 4 years under this current Liberal government have destroyed the will and hope of this country. You talk to some of the people at the doors in this community, and they are desperate. They are wondering who's there to help them. And right at the moment, it certainly isn't the Liberal government. Taxation is killing them. And the rules and regulations that are in place to destroy and to hinder.
That's your 30 seconds.
Oh,
sorry.
thank you.
I'll come back to you if you want. Candidate Thomson.
I agree, 30 seconds is not very long to talk about taxation. We need to stop thinking about taxation as this boogie monster. It's government revenue. It's how the government is able to pay for the services that we need to use every single day. Even if you're somebody that, believes in absolutely no taxation, you still believe and you still use the resources that all of us use. Farms were not built single-handedly. They were community-based, and we need the taxation levels to pay for the services that all of us use.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum. Nelson.
Okay, First of all, it's crazy to think that we need to keep taking these taxes. It's too much. And this is what I'm hearing every day when I'm at the door. I'm going to give the Conservatives some due here. They're a much better situation than the Liberals. But we go farther. We aren't spending the money that they're promising to spend. We're not going to put us further into debt. It's time to get these taxes under control.
That's your 30 seconds. Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
In the leadership debate for the Conservative Party, Mr. Bernier was 2 points behind Mr. Scheer. They're birds of a feather. The idea of cut, cut, cut is not where we need to go. We are a world power. We are a G7 leader. We will continue to be a G7 leader. And on the world stage, we have our duties. Our duties involve being part of that world community and being a good citizen in that community.
Thank you, Candidate Motz. You indicate you want a second swipe at this. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I think what some of other parties who are currently in power, soon to be losing their power, fail to realize is that government cannot give you anything they haven't taken from you first. And that's exactly what's happening. They fail to recognize that it's you as the taxpayer. You have only so much to give. And right now, on the world stage, we're kind of an embarrassment based on our leadership of our Prime Minister.
Thank you. I'll go to Candidate Thomson next.
Thank you. Again, I'm not hearing any other parties talking about going after big corporations that are not paying their fair share. Those are the people that need to be paying their fair share of taxes. Currently, there are $7 billion that are being lost by tax evasion. And that's a massive lump of money that we could be accessing, but no other party is willing to stand up to the large corporations and the ultra wealthy. That is who needs to be taxed more, not any of us here.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson, I saw your hand up next.
I disagree with that statement completely. Yes, corporations pay taxes. There's none that don't. This is Canada. We have a fair system, but it can be a lot fairer. The answer here is to stop taxing, not increasing taxing. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
On the issue of leadership and trust, in reply to Mr. Motz, you can't lead a country like this if you haven't got a university degree. I'm sorry, that's just common sense. If you can't fill out a job application and tell the truth about what you did in your past life, if you can't claim to have had a job that you were never qualified for, if you need a degree to be a drama teacher, a science teacher, a math teacher, you get a degree and you go out and pursue those careers. You cannot even sell life insurance without a certificate. Leadership matters.
We should
Thank
have
you.
some.
I know that everybody would dearly love to get into this
Oh,
one
would we
more
ever.
further, but we're going to move on. We had 4 minutes. Question number 2. We will have more of an opportunity for open debate on other issues later. If elected, does your party have a plan to balance the books? If so, what is the time frame to reach a balanced budget? And what steps will your government take to deal with the deficit and debt? And I'm going to start off with candidate Thomson first.
As I said, our plan to deal with any deficit or to fund our services is taxing the ultra wealthy, taxing the corporations. That needs to be done. But on the point of deficit, my entire life, and I mean, I am the youngest one up here, so I guess it's not that long, I have not noticed if it's a deficit or a surplus, because we notice when services are lacking. We notice when our schools are being closed and the infrastructure is being ruined. And that is what we notice as everyday citizens. We don't know if it's a deficit or surplus on a day-to-day basis. That doesn't affect our lives. But what does affect our lives is, does your kid have a school to go to? Do you have hospitals that you can go get treated in? Are our veterans being taken care of? That's what we notice.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson.
We intend to balance the budget in 2 years, so let's be clear on that. Mr. Scheer initially started out that way, and now he says he can't do it in his term of 4 years. We're going to cut the funding from the UN, the CBC, foreign aid, corporate welfare. That comes to over $36.5 billion a year, and we're going to balance the books.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum?
You know, if you're going to have a country, and a country in this century, one of the things you've got to have is communications. I said I'm a communicator, have been all my life. The CBC, to me, is like the National Railroad. It's a treasure, and continued cuts to the CBC produce nothing. It's something that we desperately need and will continue to support. As to the deficit, there's a difference between a deficit and a credit card debt. We all face credit card debt. It's something we manage on a daily basis. A deficit is a business tool. It's something that's used. It's managed. It ranks as a percentage of gross domestic product. It is a factor of business. Well used, intelligently used, it's to the benefit of the holder of that debt. Unintelligently used, it goes down the drain. The history has always been the conservatives who are in power have abused that debt and made it worse. The liberals, in fact, have controlled it and brought it down to some of its lowest records in history.
Thank you. Candidate Motz?
Oh, what a great segue. The lowest record in history over the last 4 years. We've seen that. Balanced budgets in 2019, and where are we at? 70-some billion dollars in debt over the last 4 years. There's a timeline to responsibly balance a budget, and it doesn't need significant cuts to do it. It needs spending within your limits. You and I have to do that in our businesses, in our homes. Government needs to learn to live within its means, and this current one doesn't. Cutting corporate welfare is a start. The debt incurred by this current Liberal government at the current pace that it's doing is going to strip our public services like healthcare, just the interest, just to service the interest, like healthcare and secondary education transfer payments, they're going to be equal at almost $36 billion a year in interest. Untenable. Untenable.
Thank you. I'm going to open up this question for debate as well, so we're going to have 4 minutes. Anybody want to get into it on this one? Okay, I have Candidate Nelson. Anybody else? No? Okay, Candidate Nelson. See if you can stimulate other people getting in on this. You got 30 seconds.
The goal of big government, which is what we have in Canada, is to get as much tax out of us as they can. And I've heard it said here, it's a tool that's used to benefit the stakeholder. Well, I wonder, just how do we benefit by giving $2 billion to China to build their roads and pipelines when we can't even get it done in Canada? How did we benefit from that money?
Thank you. Last Candidate Motz. Go ahead.
Well, as Candidate Nelson just said, the Asia Infrastructure Bank is certainly an embarrassment to this country, where we can't even get our own pipelines and bridges and roads built because we're giving money away to Asia. We also have the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, where we haven't seen money roll out in the manner in which it needs to in order to affect positive impact in our economy. Business and individuals are to be, government's role is to help them prosper.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum?
The issue of pipeline, I presume, is in our discussion.
Go ahead.
At some point in the evening. One of the major stumbling blocks to the construction of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and the reason the current government purchased that pipeline outright, was a deal signed by the former Conservative Prime Minister, one Mr. Harper, with the government of China, the Foreign Investment Protection Act, which allows the government of China to sue Canada in secret if their business interests are interfered with.
Thank you. Okay, Candidate Thomson, you want to get in on this before I go for a second round?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
So I'm going to address the issue of foreign aid. There's been a lot of things said about foreign aid, and that our money is being wasted by sending money in foreign aid. And as someone that knows quite a bit about international law and international relations, there's a lot of misconceptions. So for example, the money that was sent to Russia was sent to protect LGBTQ2S+ people. We're not just wasting money by sending it overseas.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson, you want a second swipe at this?
Sure, let's spend that money in Canada. Let Russia look after its own problems. The other thing I'd like to say is, you know, I'm tired of listening to the parties attacking each other. The PPC is the only party out there that we're telling you we are not going to increase spending. We're going to decrease it. And that's what resonates with Canadians. For pipelines,
Thank you. Candidate Motz, your second shot.
Yes, I think it's important to recognize that foreign aid appropriately is necessary in our world. And helping those countries who require it for redevelopment, for care of vulnerable peoples is absolutely required. But those despots and dictatorships and those who have wealthy countries do not need your tax dollars. We do. We do in this country, you do, to support our industries and our business.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
There is nothing in the conservative statements of the last week indicating that there are, in fact, grotesque wastages in foreign aid. Foreign aid is a very carefully managed category. It is managed by people whose entire lives are built around analyzing and finding situations where those dollars are used to their maximum benefit to a great number of people around the world. We have a position, and we have a position of respect and authority, and that is requires that we continue a program of foreign aid.
Candidate Thomson.
Canada has a responsibility to the international community as a G7 country, as someone has mentioned, to help our brothers and sisters around the world that are in positions of different situations that they find themselves in. And there's not as much money being sent to foreign aid as people may think. And I disagree that, you know, we shouldn't be spending money on services. That's what the government is for, is services for the people.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to next question. Next question is on the broad topic of regulatory reform. What strategies do you believe would help address regulatory issues and get Alberta's natural resources to market? Why do you think these strategies would be effective? I'm going to start off with candidate Nelson first.
yeah, Maxime's been pretty vocal on this on the platform, on the trail. And we're going to strike a royal commission to look into this. We think that regulations, there are some that are good, there are some that are necessary, but in Canada we've gone well beyond that. We need to start cutting back on some of these regulations. They're hurting small business, they're hurting individuals. We only want to keep those that are beneficial and needed.
Candidate Kirshenbaum.
The regulatory procedure is an extremely complicated one. The Liberal government, in dealing with the current Trans Mountain situation, for instance, brought out one of the most honored, retired Supreme Court judges of all time, the Honorable Frank Iacobucci, who wrote a set of regulations for Trans Mountain expansion and going forward that is absolutely ironclad. It will stand up in any court in the land, and that is being proven right now. The final challenges are being issued, and the judge's work is paying off. That discussion will be over very shortly, and the Trans Mountain Pipeline will be built this year, starting this year.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
The entire issue of the Trans Mountain Pipeline is because of the back and forth between conservative liberal governments. We were put into this situation because of conservative and liberal governments. I know that the NDP platform includes allowing provinces to veto any natural resource infrastructure that would be built through their territory. But as I have said, I do not intend to be the party leader's lapdog. I will stand up for whatever the beliefs of the people of Medicine Hat are. But that being said, the pipeline is a metaphor for jobs. And the NDP have committed to creating 300,000 green energy jobs. So if we transition to green energy sources, the Trans Mountain Pipeline would be obsolete because we would then employ the people in green energy and we would have green energy sources. And Southern Alberta is the 6th best place in the world for green energy.
Candidate Motz.
Well, a couple things. First, TMX pipeline did not need to be bought with your tax dollars by this Liberal government. They didn't require it to be purchased. What TMX said, what the Kinder Morgan said was, it is the regulations of this Liberal government that's preventing us from building it, period. 4,300 regulations have been brought in by this Liberal government to impact negatively small business in the last 4 years. C-69, the No More Pipelines bill, is going to be repealed when we form government. C-48, the tanker ban, which just surprisingly only happens to be on the West Coast, affecting Alberta's energy, needs to be repealed because it's killing this industry. It's killing Alberta. It's killing the Canadian economy. And for anyone to suggest otherwise is, to me, naive to believe that we can tax our way into prosperity, and that isn't going to happen.
Okay, I'm going to get into a supplemental question, and then I will open it for debate. The supplemental question is, what further strategies, if any, would your party look at instituting to provide the appropriate amount of regulations to ensure protection while also allowing for growth and competition? Candidate Kirshenbaum.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question.
I just read them. It's up to you to interpret it.
May I ask you to read it again, please?
You bet. What further strategies, if any, would your party look at instituting to provide the appropriate amount of regulations to ensure protection while also allowing for growth and competition?
Protection of anything in particular?
Go ahead and answer it.
I'm sorry, I will pass on this. I don't see
No
a
problem.
question I can
Candidate
answer.
Nelson?
Sure, as I said, we're going to have a Royal Commission to look at this. We think it's important for business to tell us where the problems are. We think it's proper for farmers to tell us where the issues are for them and for every industry in this country. We want to cut as much regulation out as we can and simplify the process.
Candidate Motz?
I think it's important to recognize that under conservative government, instituting a 2-for-1 rule where for every one regulation brought in by government, 2 need to be removed. And I think it's important to recognize as well that it's having ministers who are responsible for regulations and reducing red tape like Australia does will aid our industries, will help small business and large businesses alike to get past the enormous hurdles that limit growth in this country.
Candidate Thomson?
I'm confused by this question a little bit as well. But when we're talking about regulations, they exist to protect us. And when it comes to protection and growth and competition, we need to be making sure that our industries, all industries, are getting access to international markets as well as internal markets. So breaking down barriers between provinces. I also believe that, as I said, transitioning to green energy will help us be able to grow and flourish as a country and as a region. Because as I said, we are an amazing location for green energy sources. And if we start investing in that now, we'll be able to really be ahead rather than lagging behind.
Okay, thank you. Now that you've all answered the question, I'll give you my interpretation of it. Okay, I think what we need to recognize is that there's a requirement for regulations in government in this country. However, we need to balance that also with the ability for business to grow and to thrive. There is a balance. There is no, I guess, issue with having regulations if, in fact, they are protecting a very important purpose. Okay, so that's my interpretation. It probably makes absolutely no sense at all. So now we're going to go to open debate. I have Candidate Kirshenbaum had his hand up, wanted to go to open debate. Candidate Nelson, anybody else? Thomson, Motz. Okay, we're going to start off 30 seconds. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
I guess I was going to take issue with the issue of purchasing the Trans Mountain Pipeline to ensure that it gets built. But the issue of perspective once again comes into play, and I find myself falling back on that a number of times. The oil and gas future is not a very large one. There is a window. It is 10, 15, 20 years. That market will continue. It's not going to vanish, but its growth period is going to slow down. We have to develop for that. We have to be prepared for that to happen and move in new directions, not old directions.
Thank you, Candidate Nelson.
Yeah, forecast that we're seeing coming forth is there's an increasing demand for oil and gas and will be for the coming future. The PPC is the only party that is guaranteeing that we're going to get the pipelines built, east and west, because we're going to use the Constitution, Section 9210, which gives the federal government sole jurisdiction. For those provinces that don't want it, we're going to impose it on them. We're going to get it built.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
As I said, the issue of the transbound pipeline is the back and forth between the Conservative and the Liberal governments. The reason it's been held up before and why it hasn't been built yet is because of former Prime Minister Harper pushing through the consultations with Indigenous persons, and the administrative law tribunals felt that he did not listen to them well enough.
Thank you. Candidate Motz.
Well, in rebuttal to my Liberal candidate friend, global demand for energy, experts are telling us, will increase 25% in the next 20 years for Canada's natural resources. We are the third largest in the world for reserves. Why aren't we producing them? Could it be that the regulations are killing an industry? I wonder why that is.
Thank you. Is there interest to go for a second round on this? Perfect. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
If we look backward, that's fine. Of the 3 top oil and gas producing nations in the world, this one is the only democracy. The others are not. And as such, their business interests drive everything. In a democracy, you have to do things differently. There has to be balance, there has to be fairness. In the other oil-producing nations, there doesn't have to be. They can just market their pants off until they can sell all the oil they can produce. There are restrictions, and we have to live by them.
Thank
I
you.
think we're doing a pretty good job.
Candidate Nelson.
Sure, as I said, Section 92(10) of the Constitution has been used over 300 times in the history of Canada. It's how we got our highways built, our railways, our airways, and now we're going to use it to get the pipelines built.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
I would like to preface what I'm about to say by saying that I myself am, generally speaking, a supporter of the oil and gas industry. My amazing husband works in the oil and gas industry. But diversification of the economy is necessary. It doesn't matter what your economy is based on. It is bad to rely solely on one economy and one source of revenue. It could be making pottery. We need to diversify the economy and move to green energy sources.
Thank you. Candidate Motz. You good? Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the next question. It's under the general topic of trade. How will your party help diversify trade opportunities for Canadian businesses at home and abroad? And I'm going to start off with candidate Thomson first.
That's a loaded question. So obviously opening up markets and making sure that our amazing Canadian producers and workers are accessing international markets is fundamental to improving the economy. But we also want to make sure that we are trading with people that are good. Meaning that we are going to ensure that we are not having trade deals with genocidal dictators and countries that don't respect human rights. So it's really important for us to make sure that when we're trading, we're making sure we're trading with people that instill the same values as us, but at the same time opening up our markets more.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
It is indeed a difficult question. Probably, I'm not sure of the numbers, but certainly one of our very large trading partners is China. And it's well known that China is not a leader in human rights. There's not much choice. Again, because of that Foreign Investment Protection Act, our trade with China is not voluntary. We no longer can choose to pull back our trade obligations to China, or we are subject to secret lawsuits. We will never know about them, but they're out there, and they are enforced, and they will be enforced for another 35 years. So we try to do the best that we possibly can. We look for partners who are beneficial to create agreements that are beneficial in a two-way trade agreement. Those sometimes work out, they sometimes don't. You can only make your very best efforts on a day-to-day basis. And I have confidence in the team that is in charge.
Thank you, candidate Motz.
Under the previous Conservative government, 53 trade agreements were championed in 10 years. The TPP, which the Liberals took credit for, was ready to be signed when the election occurred in 2015. And NAFTA 2.0 was a failure by this current Liberal government. We need to build trade relationships with countries you can trust, countries that respect the rule of law. And we also need to open our provincial borders to trade within Canada without restriction. And that includes not only trading our commodities, but trading our resources and our people, so that if you have a ticket in one place, you can practice your ticket anywhere in this country without having to re-qualify. That will open up trade and expand the opportunities for Canadians to be mobile in this country.
Candidate Nelson?
Interprovincial trade costs Canadians about $75 billion a year. That's solely in the purview of the federal government to control that, and we need to stop the nonsense and get it done. It's much easier to trade with China than it is for us to trade with BC or Nova Scotia. We can't have those restrictions anymore. On the note of China, I think they've opened the door for us to cut those silly trade deals that we have with them. Let's bring those two Canadians home. If they don't want to deal with us, let's stop selling to them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask a supplementary question, and then we're going to open it up for debate. Supplementary question is, what internal trade barriers exist between the provinces, and how will your government help to address these barriers? I'm going to start off with candidate Motz.
Well, I guess I answered that question prematurely, didn't I, last
Yeah,
time?
you did. Go ahead.
Well, interprovincial trade, as Mr. Nelson has said, the hindrances there has hampered provincial economies, hampered our local business as well as the Canadian economy. It needs to be, the regulations that prohibit trade between provinces and between companies in those provinces needs to be examined and lifted. And like I said, we need to ensure that our workforces have the freedom to travel between provinces. If they qualify in one province, they should also qualify elsewhere.
Candidate Thomson?
I feel like all four of us agree that there needs to be better interprovincial trade. That's it, right? We all agree on that. So we just need to get that done and really make sure that everybody sits down at the table and gets that done. Unfortunately, the last time that all the provinces were able to agree was in the 80s when we got our constitution repatriated. So hopefully we can get that done.
Candidate Nelson?
Yeah, as I said, this is up to the federal government to get this done. Yeah, we need to consult with the provinces, but at the end of the day, we need some leadership here, and let's just get the act done. If a product is fine to be sold in Alberta, it should be fine to be sold in every other province in the country.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum?
That, of course, says that the provinces have to be on board, they have to want it. If one province threatens to turn off the taps because things aren't going their way, that does not bode well for the future of interprovincial trade. That raises hackles. That's not how it works. You've got to be a player. You've got to come to the table prepared to make an offer and live by it. And it's not a federal issue. It's up to the provinces to accept that those kinds of things are available to them and to make it work.
Okay, thank you. Is there interest to open this one up to debate? I see candidate Nelson. Anybody else? Okay, candidate Nelson, you have 30 seconds.
Sure. It's easy to say it's up to the provinces. The provinces never agree on these sort of things when they have an iron in the fire. We need to see leadership here from the federal government. We need to get them sat down at the table, and we need to work this out.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So we can't keep just going around the bush, pointing fingers at each other. Let's get some farmers sitting down at the table, and let's get this thing hashed out.
Great, thanks. Candidate Motz?
In a confederation, you work together as a team for the betterment of the confederation, which is what we currently have as the Confederation of Canada. However, when we have individual provinces who refuse to trade back and forth, or there's barriers to allow that to happen, we're not benefiting the entire confederation. So I think there's a multitude of approaches that can be taken, and regulatory encumbrances can be lifted and removed.
Thank you. Anybody else want to get in on this? All right, we're going to move on to the next question. Small business. If elected, what actions will your party to take to help small businesses succeed? I'm going to start off with candidate Thomson.
On Saturday, I had the opportunity to go out to Deerview Meats and try some delicious sausages. And I had a nice conversation with the owners there, and we talked about small businesses. And one of the major things that the NDP are promising for small businesses is making sure that they have access to the larger market. So looking at how we can partner small businesses and give them access to international markets and interprovincial markets. As I said at the beginning as well, we're looking at making sure that family businesses can be passed down through generations without having to incur a major tax hit, which is currently the case, so that small businesses can flourish and future plan to allow their businesses to be passed through generations and become really a cornerstone of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson?
Yeah, one of the first things we're going to do is we're eliminating capital gains. That frees up a lot of equity for small business owners. We're also, in our riding very particular, we're reducing the farm tax from 15% to 10%. Our farmers are probably the biggest employer in our riding. And we need to make sure that they've got the equity they need to buy the new equipment, to hire the people they need, put fuel in their tractors, and we need to take some real solid steps into helping the employers that are in this riding.
Thank you. Candidate Motz?
Well, first of all, I think what needs to occur is there needs to be a complete step back in repealing of the job-killing and business-killing taxes of the small business taxes that occurred between Mr. Morneau and Mr. Trudeau in 2017. Not just the small step back that occurred, but a full retraction of those little things like allowing spouses to be exempt from Trudeau's tax on dividends in a business, allowing, as was already mentioned, families to pass on their business, allowing businesses to save for their own retirement, the entrepreneurs in those businesses to save for their own retirement or save for their own business advancement rather than taxing them at our proposed 73%. That's what we need to do. We need to stop the taxes that are killing businesses and get out of the way and let them prosper.
Thank you. And finally, candidate Kirshenbaum.
As with so many things, you can look at it from one side or you can look at it from the other. Candidate Motz raises an interesting point about the business of small businesses employing spouses and making them part of the team. On the other side, that practice is known as income sprinkling. It allows a high wealth individual to split that income and credit it to other members of the family upon whom it is not taxable. We can't have it both ways. We can't cut the taxes and increase the possibilities for small businesses to succeed. It's got to be a balanced thing, and it has to be done over time, gently. It has to be done considering many factors.
Okay, thank you. Any interest in getting into debate on this one? Candidate Thomson, I have Thomson, Nelson, I bet Motz. Bear with me. Candidate Thomson, 30 seconds.
Thank you. When it comes to small businesses, they're regular people just the same as all of us, which means they have expenses. And the NDP is committed to making life more affordable. And one of the ways that our platform includes savings for small businesses is universal Pharma care. Whatever model of healthcare that small businesses have, it's coming out of the business owner's profits. So if we have universal Pharma care in Canada, it means that business owners don't then have to pay for that healthcare.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson.
Who's going to pay for it?
I already answered that.
Sorry.
We need to make sure that government stays out of our pocket in the first place. If we're really going to discuss this seriously, we have a serious deficiency in the way that our healthcare system is delivered. If you're an addict and living on the street, you're provided the drugs, you're provided the items that you need to shoot up. If you're a diabetic, you have to go buy your own.
Okay, so I'll give you pre-warning. We are going to get to national pharmacare. So, yeah, all right. So, candidate Motz.
I think it's important to recognize that government's role, one of their many roles, is to create an environment where businesses can prosper and create an environment where businesses are agents of prosperity, not sources of revenue. And when we recognize that when businesses prosper, our Canadian economy prospers, individuals prosper who work in those businesses. And it's not the government who should be in the business of prosperity for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth Kirshenbaum, you want to round out the discussion on this?
I think I'm done on the subject. Thank
You good? Yeah. Do we want to have a second round on it? Okay, we'll move on to the next topic. Question number 5, topic is Connected Canada. What strategies will your party commit to in order to ensure that Canada can seize opportunities in the digital age? I'm going to start off with candidate Nelson.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about G5. I've had a lot of people ask me if I'm for it. I grew up when computers were not a common thing. I owned a Tandy 1000 and come up through the years. I believe in technology. I think it has great opportunities for us. And I think that in our riding, it's a real disappointment for most of us that live out in rural areas because we don't have it. You're working off a hub. You're working off slow dial-up. I think we need, for our riding, we need to have it more equitable for everyone.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
It's a lovely subject. It's one in which Canada is a leader and always has been a leader. Canada, I think, had the third communications satellite in operation. Yes, the third one. It's going forward. It is happening. It is not a Canadian-driven affair. We're not at the forefront in that. Local internet by satellite right down to rural properties is in the very imminent future, and it will be there. So I think that it's certainly an absolutely essential service. It will be there. It's coming.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
Thank you. As far as I'm aware, the NDP is the only party that has in its platform a commitment to improve rural internet so that people can be better connected, and also to lower our cell phone bills. People in Canada are paying $100, $200, $300 for our cell phone bills. Data rates are through the roof, and it's just unacceptable because there's a quasi-monopoly between 3 companies that control our cell phones. And I think everybody in this room can probably agree, we pay too much for our cell phone bills. So the NDP has committed to lowering our cell phone bills so that we can be better connected and improving infrastructure for rural internet.
Thank you. Candidate Motz.
Well, unfortunately for Canada Thomson, Conservatives have been championing the need for internet connectivity improvements in rural Canada, and will continue to do so. The former government had $500 million set aside in the last fiscal, or in the last 4 years for connectivity. I advocated for a project in my riding of Hat-Cardston-Warner for $2 million, slightly over $2 million of that, and unfortunately only got $200,000 toward that project. Mr. Nelson is absolutely correct. There are businesses in this riding in rural Canada who require high-speed internet capacity to perform their businesses appropriately, and because they live in rural Canada, they should not be penalized because they live in rural Canada other than urban Canada, so they need connectivity.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a supplementary question, and then we'll get into debate, all right? Supplementary question. We will continue with the topic of Connected Canada, but now focus on infrastructure. If elected, what will your party consider for its priorities for public infrastructure investment, and why? And I'm going to start off with candidate Kirshenbaum.
That area is out of my expertise. Public access is primarily, from what I've seen, is in fact coming back to what we've discussed, the issue of cell phones and data, and those areas are, as they are, in some difficulty. We have in Alberta the SuperNet, which connects almost all public facilities. It is a provincially owned facility. It is extremely high speed. It's also very difficult to get onto. The possibility of opening that up for broader and wider use is certainly in the forecast of possibility.
Thank you. Candidate Motz.
I think it's fair to say that you can't hope to have infrastructure for connectivity happen on its own. There are industry the industry who's involved in its development will require incentive to connect rural Canada. And we understand that and appreciate that. We also appreciate that 5G is on the horizon for Canada, and there's some decisions that need to be made on the service providers for that. And whether it comes up, down the road or not, but Huawei is not a Chinese company that we want to have anything to do with Canada's infrastructure and technology. Nothing.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson?
Yeah, again, I just want to remind everyone, a large portion of our riding is rural. Except for Medicine Hat, it's just little communities dotted across the landscape. It takes 3 hours to drive from one side of the riding to the other, and very, very few people have high-speed internet. Satellite doesn't work. Tried it, been there. We need to have some real solutions. But talking about infrastructure a little bit more in general, I want to see the road twin between Tabor and Medicine Hat. We've been talking about it for a long time. That's something that needs to happen for our riding.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson?
As I've said, the NDP are committed to improving high-speed internet, so that would obviously include installing infrastructure to allow that to get through to the rural communities. But we're also committed to improving public transit, and that's a major infrastructure that will connect Canada. On our platform, it includes creating alternatives for the fact that people have been stranded due to the closure of the Greyhound in the prairies. So there are infrastructures beyond what the others have talked about that need to be built, and Jagmeet has committed that if provinces are unwilling to fund key infrastructures such as hospitals and roads, he will step in and make those projects happen.
Thank you. Is there interest in debating this further? I have candidate Motz, Kirshenbaum. Anybody else? Yep. Okay. Yeah, what the heck. Right. Okay, so we'll go with candidate Motz to start.
Thank you. My initial comments on infrastructure were related to connectivity. If we're talking about infrastructure, obviously the number 3 highway, as Mr. Nelson has said, is a priority for this region. We also need to ensure that our border crossings, we only have one in all of Alberta that is 24 hours a day and can do commercial traffic. That is unacceptable in this day and age with high volume traffic.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum?
I'd like to come, what's my time?
30 seconds.
It is 30. I'd like to come back to the satellite communications issue. Point of correction. The satellite internet that we have used in the past is not the satellite internet of the future. We are talking about an array of satellites. They're called micro-satellites. There will be access to them for internet from the ground to satellite. It's an entirely new format, and it's way, way better. So we have that to look forward to. It's not here yet, but it is coming.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson?
That's great that that's in the future sometime, maybe. Let's have something that's more in line for us. We're talking the next 4 years. That's the mandate that we get when we're elected. So let's talk about what's going to happen in the next 4 years. And I think opening up the SuperNet may be one answer to that. And everyone here is tired of waiting.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson?
When we talk about infrastructure, infrastructure is used by people. So we also need to make sure that the infrastructure serves the people well. And part of that includes improving the Air Passenger Bill of Rights that was enacted, and it doesn't really serve Canadians. And if we have a better Air Passenger Bill of Rights, then Canadians can be connected better. I mean, when I was at university in Fredericton, it was cheaper for me to fly to Miami than to Calgary. And that's insane. We should be able to travel within our own country affordably and rely on the services that we have to travel within Canada.
Okay, is there interest in doing a second round on that? Okay, we'll move on to the next question.
Can I get another bottle of water? Here. Apparently.
Okay, well, skills is the next topic. How will your government ensure Canada's workforce, has the skills it needs to meet the workplace demands of the future? And we'll start off with candidate Motz first.
No, thank you for the question. Our world and job demands are changing. The requirements for for education and skills training are changing. I think it's important to appreciate that much of our industry, when someone comes out of post-secondary education, they require training when they get to their employment. And I've seen a couple of institutions in this province are rejigging their look at education to say, well, our people that come out of these institutions should be ready for the job that they are being educated for. And I think that's a start. We also need to appreciate that there is a need for retraining, and we need to encourage business and provide opportunity for business to, let's face it, our employees are our best resource in this country. And we need to ensure that they have the skills necessary to perform the tasks that are required of them.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
So when it comes to workplace skills, for me, the first thing I think about is access to education, whatever that education may be, whether it be post-secondary, whether it be trade training, but there needs to be access to education. And there's a lot of barriers that exist right now, a major one being financial. We need to really fix the Canadian student loan program so that it works for Canadians and people are not being burdened with debt that makes them unable to work to their fullest capacity. We also need to be attracting economic immigrants and making sure that when they arrive, that they are ready to work as soon as they got off the plane. Because if we're, bringing them into the country on the basis of their contribution to the economy, we need to make sure that they are able to use their skills and their certifications within Canada and not expecting them to recertify on their own and figure it out in a muddle of chaos.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
Thank you. Certainly the issue of training has been at the forefront. It's certainly an issue here. We have many people who have been forced out of the oil and gas industry who went into that without an education beyond perhaps secondary school, and now are in need of training. And those training programs are being built. They are employed. There are forthcoming gigantic adjustments to the student loan programs that will provide long periods of forgiveness after graduation until a certain level of income is reached before repayment is required. For people getting started in a career after retraining, working on student loans, if they happen to at some point have a child. There's another period of respite involved in repaying student loans. Significant contributions to making those retraining programs accessible and available, and backing for those programs so that they're accessible for people who need them.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson.
Yeah, I think here in Alberta we actually have a great trades trading program. I've got a strong background in that, deal with the people on a day-to-day basis. We can do more, we can do better, we can expand. I agree that with our colleges and universities, it's become a point now where it's a burden for students to go, and a lot of them now are thinking, can I afford this? And it's really, the richer kids get to go. Poorer ones, they take a lot of thinking before they'll commit to that. So there's things we can do to make it better. I think when we're bringing immigrants into the country, we need to look at it on a more short-term basis. If we need bakers, let's get bakers. If we need electricians or plumbers, whatever the need for Canada is, that's who we should be recruiting.
Thank you. Is there interest in opening this one up for debate? Candidate Motz, 30 seconds.
Oh, thank you. It was mentioned already, economic immigration has benefited the Canadian economy enormously over many decades, and it needs to continue. There are jobs in this riding that Canadians refuse to do, and you talk to the employers in those particular industries, they have a very tough time finding employees, and so having the opportunity to expand the temporary worker, foreign worker program would be beneficial to our local economy.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, we'll move on to the next question. And now we get the pharmacare question. I know everybody was waiting for this one. Does your party support a national pharmacare program? If so, how would it be implemented? If you do not support a national program, why? And I'm going to start off with candidate Nelson. Sorry, Thomson.
Oh, you're so ready.
Sorry, I got you all worked up there, candidate Thomson.
Yes, it is the key point of our platform, Universal Pharmacare, because as I said, nobody should have to choose between rent and medication, and no one should have to choose between food or medication. And we're talking about medications that save people's lives, but also medications that, you know, you need every once in a while for minor things. And as candidate Nelson has said before, there's this attitude that how dare somebody else get medication? Why are we not asking, how dare we not get medication all for free? That's what we need, is making sure that we all have access to whatever medication we need. I remember once I got bronchitis, and the doctor asked me 5 times, do I have pharmacy coverage? Because the medication that I was going to be prescribed was so expensive that he needed to make sure I'd be able to afford it. That conversation should not be had in Canada. It should just be, okay, you're sick, here's your medication. You need it, here it is.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson.
Sure. I'm in favor of pharmacare. I, like everybody else, has prescription drugs that I require to take. However, it isn't free. And all that happens now is we share the cost out amongst all Canadians. So this is something that we need to put on the ballot that Canadians can vote on. Is this something that Canadians want? If it is, let's get it done.
Thank you. Candidate Motz.
Studies have shown that approximately 90% of Canadians already have drug plans in place that allow them to have adequate coverage. A conservative government appreciates and completely understands that there are those vulnerable in our society that do not have that. And we need to ensure that those individuals are looked at, serviced. We need to look at ways in which we can find gaps in the system that isn't working. And so that's the group that needs to be worked at first. If we're looking at a national pharmacare program that the parliamentary budget officer has said it's going to be between $20 and $25 billion a year to institute. If that's the case, what's going to be cut and how is it going to be paid for? So let's start with ensuring that those individuals who don't have any coverage now are looked at first. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
You know, numbers are numbers, but I know that Mr. Motz has an excellent health care plan because we pay for that. The 90% number, no one can prove that 90% number. If we had time, a show of hands around here, I guarantee you 90% of the population does not have the kind of coverage that we need to make a healthy population. My guess is 40. We might be lucky. The fact is, there is a vast number of people in this country who do not have health care coverage. That number really must be taken care of. It is a plank of the Liberal policy going forward. Our progressive friends at the other end of the table absolutely agree. We'll figure a way to pay for it. It has to be done.
Okay, thank you. I'm guessing we want to get into a debate on this one. Okay, I have Motz, Thomson, Nelson, everybody. Well, that's a surprise. Okay, starting off, 30 seconds, candidate Motz.
Well, I'm surprised it's the plank under the Liberal platform. It's more like a noose around their neck to weigh them down. They have costed a $57 billion excessive budget that they've, or deficit that they're projecting with their platform they just announced recently. But surprise, surprise, pharmacare is not included in that projection. Folks, people in this country need care, but somebody has to pay for it. So let's start with those who are vulnerable first, who don't have coverage. That's what we need to not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
So I have addressed how we're going to pay for it multiple times. We're going to tax the super wealthy. But also, I find it very ironic that we're talking about who's going to pay for it when existing healthcare coverage is paid for by businesses. And my colleagues to the left say that they're pro-business, but they're, rather than having a universal pharmacare that's going to be taken care of by taxing the super wealthy, they want businesses to have to pay for that healthcare coverage. We have also on our platform included universal, not universal, but dental care for
Thank
people.
you. Candidate Nelson.
I think it's lower than 40% in our riding. Farmers certainly don't have health care programs. They pay for it themselves. Most of the small businesses in this riding, we pay for it ourselves. It is something that needs to be looked at. But as a People's Party, we want to hear from the people. Is it something you want to pay for? Because you're going to pay for it one way or another. Thank you.
Okay, candidate Kirshenbaum.
The power of a universal program is that that agency has the opportunity to deal with suppliers of drugs, to deal with international suppliers of the medications that are needed, to drive those prices down to the lowest possible level. When it's a single, it's what they call in the United States a single-payer system. The fact is the United States can't bring themselves to do it. You've got to get off that. It works if you provide the power to a federal agency and do it broad-based across the entire system.
Okay, do we want to do a second round on this? Okay, candidate Motz.
I think it's important to recognize that Canada is a small market in the pharmaceutical business. They really are. And, we need to look at, generic drugs. We need to look at why the cost of prices are the way they are. But if you start with those that are most vulnerable, you still have the opportunity to ensure that those pharmaceutical companies who don't really care about the Canadian market because we don't matter much to their bottom line, we can still get drugs in a cheaper way and less expensive. I think it's important. Oh, sorry, my time's up.
Candidate Thomson.
To address that we're a small market, we're really not. Wales has universal pharmacare coverage, and they're substantially geographically and population-wise much smaller than Canada. But when I was talking about dental care, we're talking about dental care for people that make under $70,000 and partial coverage for people that make between $70,000 and $90,000. And preventative care is cheaper. Let's just say that. Preventative care is cheaper.
Thank you, candidate Nelson.
Sure, the rich aren't going to pay for it. Let's be clear on that. They're already paying taxes. For anyone to say they're not is disingenuous. What we're asking is that they pay more. That's a trickle down that we all get. They're the employers that we work for. It is important, but again, we need to go to the people. We need to know what you want. It's not up to government to tell you how you're going to have your health care delivered.
Candidate Kirshenbaum.
While we may be a relatively smaller market than, for instance, the United States, our nearest neighbor and largest trading partner, they're extraordinarily envious of the drug prices in Canada. American busloads of senior citizens cross the border on a daily basis to fill prescriptions at Canadian pharmacies because the prices are that much lower. We do have bargaining power, we do have negotiating power, and a single-payer healthcare system is a very effective way of making that work, as it is in almost every country in the world.
Thank you. Next topic, government accountability and engagement. As a candidate, you are elected to represent your constituents. How will you commit to engaging citizens within your riding in order to represent varying viewpoints, and how would you address opposing perspectives? And we're going to start off with candidate Nelson.
Well, I think all the candidates here are already engaged in this with the people in the community, but I think that needs to not stop. Whoever gets elected, off they go to Ottawa, and then we forget about the people in the riding. I'm going to be having an office in Medicine Hat and Cardston, and we'll have a mobile office that'll go through all the small communities at least once a week. My phone number will be given to the constituents that you can call me directly. I want to know the concerns. This is a grassroots government, and we want to talk to you. I'm there to represent you. I'm not there to represent the People's Party, and I'm not there to collect a paycheck and a pension.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
It's a fairly standard issue. I think it's dealt with correctly and properly in the vast majority of Liberal ridings across the country. Representation is available. Each candidate, each member of Parliament operates an outgoing program of communications, whether it's by mail or by contact into community offices. I would undertake to offer those services in spades if that was to become the case. The issue is encouraging members of the population to be in touch. We often feel we have no opportunity to be heard by members of Parliament. The issue is reaching out and trying. The response level, I've done it myself with members on the other side. It's perfectly easy to do. There isn't a single member of Parliament in office or to be in office who turns down contact with people in his or her constituency.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson?
I think accountability and engagement is fundamental to this job. As somebody that really enjoys the internet, I'm fully dedicated to utilizing that, whether it be Skyping constituents to have a chat if I'm not able to meet them in person, making sure that they can book appointments with me, and using tools like Facebook to do little polls to see how people feel about different issues. Too often, constituents don't even know what's going on in the House of Commons and are unaware of the things that are even being discussed or the votes that their representatives are making. I did a little bit of research about candidates Mott's voting history, and I talked to some people about it, and they were shocked. For example, that he voted down making Remembrance Day a national holiday. Did any of you know that he had done that? So these are things that are important to us, and we really need to be making sure that we're accessible and engaging, and I'm also dedicated to making sure that the youth are able to engage with me as well.
Thank you. Candidate Motz?
Oh, thank you. When things are included in omnibus bills, and the omnibus bill is going to kill your country, you don't vote, even though there's bits of that that have some sense, and most of it doesn't. As far as government accountability, please tell me that this Liberal government has not been accountable. For Pete's sake, I can't imagine how you can be more disengaged from your Canadian public than this current government. As far as me personally, I have been continually engaged with my constituents. I have a youth advisory board made up of young high school students to young professionals from different ethnicities, different sexual orientations, and different parts of the riding. I seek feedback from them. I continually impact or seek feedback from businesses and constituents across this riding. This riding is 30,000+ square kilometers, and there hasn't been a whole lot of places that I haven't been to or people that I haven't spoken to.
Thank you. Next question, again, going with the government accountability thing, is on collaboration. As a chamber, we are a solution-driven organization through the various recommendations that we propose. We may not always align with government policies, but we always seek out viable solutions regardless of whether we have opposing viewpoints. In the spirit of collaboration, tell us which policy or recommendation from an opposing party's platform you would consider implementing and why. And let's make this a little bit more interesting. If you're on the left side of the spectrum, don't pick a party that's on the left side of the spectrum. Maybe pick a party that's on the right side of the spectrum, and go. All right, candidate Kirshenbaum.
You know, I really do agree that a great deal of effort has to be made in the subject of communications. The barrier to access to high-speed communication in rural areas is, in fact, a critical point. I have no argument with that. I only can assure you that putting down wires in this day and age is not a good strategy going forward. It's a good idea, but it needs to be executed properly and perhaps a little more slowly than some people might like. But yes, I agree with the theory.
Okay, candidate Motz.
Collaboration is absolutely critical in all forms of government, and what's unfortunate is people generally see the shenanigans of question period and believe that's what government's all about. I can tell you unequivocally that we have accomplished many things, and I have many good friends on the other parties who we actually agree on some things. I don't agree with a lot of their stuff, but I do agree on some. And collaboration is critical to get things done. I think we've seen that occur on multiple occasions, and unfortunately it doesn't occur to the extent that it needs to when it comes to taxation, when it comes to business development, when it comes to our responsible energy development, when it comes to the infrastructure, when it comes to small business, and we need to collaborate that collaborate with that on a greater extent.
Candidate Nelson.
As I think we've said here all along, it's if something makes sense, it doesn't matter which party originated it. I think if it makes sense, we need to do it. I've heard a lot of good ideas here tonight. I don't think anyone has the cornerstone on that. If it's an idea that resonates with my constituents, and that's what they want, that's what I'm gonna go and represent.
Great, thank you. Candidate Thomson?
I think I'm going to be the only person to actually answer this question. So I agree with the Liberal platform concerning if someone is paying off their student loans, making sure that if they then get pregnant, that they're then able to get kind of lower payments so that they can, you know, raise a family and not have the stress of the student loans. And all four of us agreed on improving interprovincial trade. So I don't know why I'm the only one that was actually able to properly answer that and agree with other candidates' platforms, but there you go.
Thank you. Okay, so we encourage the public to submit questions through our website prior to the forums, and have collected questions from you this evening. So we're going to go into some of those questions. Okay, so the first question, can you please tell us what your party plans to do about climate change in 1 minute or less? Candidate Motz, you're up.
Thank you. We understand and appreciate that you can't tax your way into a clean environment. A carbon tax has done nothing to improve the carbon emissions in this country, and it never will. What you need to do is you need to continue to innovate and encourage innovation. Alberta, Canada, has some of the best minds and innovators to carbon capture, sequester, and repurposing. We also need to look at conservation and re-invoking or invoking the previous ability to conserve some of our natural resources and natural habitat that we have in this country. And we also need to appreciate that the whole impact of climate is not confined by borders. So we need to ensure that with Canada's 1% or thereabouts contribution to the world's carbon emissions, that we don't control what that looks like.
Candidate Kirshenbaum?
Sorry, my pen just exploded. Because I was writing a lot.
You shouldn't grip it so hard.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Listen, I have, first of all, I think that the issue of climate certainly needs to be recognized by governments. It needs to be addressed as a primary issue. It is absolutely pivotal to our future, every one of us. And we have to address it individually more than we leave it to government. Government supplies direction. It's up to us to take action and make it better. I don't know how many people on this committee drive an electric vehicle. I do. I bought it without a government subsidy. There are government subsidies coming. Quebec increased its electric vehicle sales by 1,300% last year because they provide a generous subsidy to those who buy electric vehicles. These are non-polluting electric vehicles. They're out there. There will be more of them. It's a very strong part of the overall. I could go on this with some, but I do believe it's an individual thing for us to contribute to. A price on carbon does work. The government of BC has proven it. It's moderate. The rebate pays off.
Candidate Thomson?
There's something that me and Motz agree on again. What? You need to do more than a carbon tax. I do believe that a carbon tax does work, and unfortunately, the money that we were using in Alberta is now going to Ottawa. But it needs to be partnered with innovation, with transitioning and retraining workers to make sure that they have jobs in green energy solutions. We have committed to 300,000 jobs in green energy solutions. We're also committed to improving public transit, as well as access to green cars. We're also committed to partnering with farmers to help them transition to green energy sources, as well as making sure that there's Indigenous leadership in improving the environment because they know the land very, very well. So the NDP is committed to addressing the climate emergency and declaring it a climate emergency. And I was the only candidate that was at the climate action strike on Friday.
Candidate Nelson?
Sure, there is no climate emergency.
There is not.
We believe in climate change. Who doesn't? Right here in our own riding, we're still digging up dinosaur bones. We know that the Earth was much, much warmer in the past. We also know it was much colder. So this 2 degrees that they're talking about from the UN, humans are not going to end in 12 years, just so you know. There are a lot of things that we can do personally to improve our communities, our land, our water, but let's keep in mind that the farmers in our area are some of the best stewards of the land in the world, and they are not the ones that are guilty of causing the pollution in Asia and in Africa. So Canadians shouldn't be paying to clean that up.
Okay, I was going to move on to the next question, but I think there might be a wish to have a little bit of debate on this. Sure. Everybody agree? Okay. Candidate Motz, you're first up on 30 seconds.
Thank you. A couple things. First of all, I think it's very, very true that, electric vehicles are fantastic, but if I was to get across my riding, it would probably take me a couple of days to get across my riding electric vehicle because I have no place to recharge them. Getting back to the issue of climate emergency, I agree with Mr. Nelson. I think that there is a lot of hype on climate emergency that there really is not a climate emergency at all. Do we need to be responsible for our environment? Absolutely. And we each have a role to play in that unequivocally.
Thank you. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
Mr. Motz and I were discussing whether or not the BC carbon fee has worked, and the subject came up about money now going to Ottawa because of January 1. There will be a price on carbon in Alberta. It is federally legislated. That money does go to Ottawa, and most of it comes back. Individually, the rebates will, in the vast majority of cases, outdo any money spent on the price of carbon for small users. Large users, on the other hand, industrial users, will pay a fee on carbon.
Thank you.
And that...
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
Thank you. There is a climate emergency. And even if there isn't, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if we improve our environment? So we make our rivers cleaner, so we make our air cleaner. I mean, I don't think that it's all right for people to be gambling with our planet, with our lives, with the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. So this needs to be addressed, and there is a climate emergency.
Thank you. Candidate Nelson.
Sure. Just a note on electric vehicles. There was just an electric charging station installed in Cardston. Lo and behold, there's a diesel generator there to power it. So don't tell me about pollution. And again, I want to say I disagree. There is no emergency. We need to take better control of our environment, true. But there isn't a person in this room that can be held responsible for what goes on in another country. We are not the welfare state of the world.
Okay, we're going to do a second round, starting with candidate Motz.
Well, I have to disagree with my Liberal friend because there won't be a carbon tax implemented on January 1st because there's going to be Conservative government that's going to repeal that carbon tax. The second thing that needs to happen is the raw sewage that this Liberal government has allowed to continue to be dumped into the St. Lawrence and to our Pacific Ocean and to our rivers and lakes across this country needs to stop. Under the Conservatives, there has been enormous opportunities and past governments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Candidate Kirshenbaum.
To Mr. Nelson's point about farmers not being responsible for the climate emergency, I couldn't agree more. Farmers, however, are the victims and will continue to be the victims. The amount of rainfall this year was that disastrous to crops. We all recognize that. This is a climate change, and that climate change is going to cost all of us. So the issue is, do we work on it or do we ignore it?
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
In 30 seconds, I'm going to try to address corporations and foreign aid. Wow. So we are committed to getting rid of single-use plastics. But for me, one of the things that really frustrates me about single-use plastics is corporations that use single-use plastics. I worked at a retail store in Medicine Hat, and every time we got stock, every single item came in a plastic bag. Why are we not talking about that? Every single store, every single item is coming in a plastic bag. Also, foreign aid can be used to address climate change in other countries, and we need to be leaders.
Candidate Nelson, you get the last word on this.
Okay, I think a lot of us in this room remember when we used to use paper bags. We were told by the government that was bad, we were killing trees, so they changed us to plastic. Now they're telling us plastic is bad. I want to keep you in mind, though, there are a lot of single-use plastics that we cannot get rid of, and we have no product to replace them with. Many of our hospitals are using syringes and other instruments. There is nothing out there that will replace those. So let's get something in plan first.
Thank you.
Before we ban them.
No, we're going to go on another question. It'll be the last question, and then we'll move into final statements. And this is another one that's going to be a little bit tough to answer in 1 minute, but here we go. On electoral reform, what system of voting do you prefer? Example, first past the post, which is the current method, single transfer, proportional, alternate vote, or mixed member proportional. And I'm going to start off with candidate Nelson.
Our party has not made a stance on this. It's not policy. If you're asking me my personal opinion, I think the system we have right now works. Let's put this to a referendum to people. Let's find out what people want. And then let's take the time to get it right. We don't want any knee-jerk reactions to make something worse than the system we already have.
Thank you. Candidate Thomson.
I'm so excited. This is my favorite thing. So electoral reform is a massive part of our platform. Trudeau promised it. He didn't deliver it. So we prefer a mixed member proportionate representation system, which is somewhat of a complicated system to kind of describe. I'm not going to be able to do it in 40 seconds. But it is a system that ensures that everybody's voice is heard, that everybody's vote counts, and that it is impossible to screw with. You can't force it to result in something. It ensures that there is representation of everyone's votes, and it also ensures that there is a mixture of parties so that there's more collaboration in the House of Commons. I will be doing a Facebook Live video after this to fully describe mixed member proportionate representation, so please go on my Facebook and watch that.
Candidate Kirshenbaum.
The former attempt at election reform didn't make it, and all due respect to my progressive colleague, it didn't make it because Mr. Singh was the primary objector to any changes being made. Going forward, my personal choice is for a ranked single ballot, where you get to choose 1, 2, 3. The voting process then becomes going down through the ranks, and first choice is the winner. It's simple, it works. Also, it requires a review of voter incentive. Our voter turnout rate is not good enough. We need to do what we can to encourage voter turnout rates more in the 75 to 80% rate, if not 100 as the ultimate target.
Thank you. Candidate Motz.
Thank you. I think it's up to Canadians to decide on how they wish to elect their representatives in Ottawa. It can't be up to government to do that. We have heard from our Prime Minister and this Liberal government that they were going to reform our electoral process. They didn't deliver it. They did, however, to try to stack the deck in their favor with the election process. And election frauds this time around are still a possibility, given the rules that exist or the changes that have been made in legislation. So we need to ensure that whatever process we come up with, and I'd be certainly interested to see what you put out on this, we need to ensure that it properly represents the wishes of Canadians and it properly represents Canadians in Parliament, so you have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, as they say in the House of Commons, the time for question period has expired. I think the audience will agree with me that we probably got a lot more good answers here tonight than they get every day in question period in Ottawa. So please join me in thanking the candidates.
Liberals don't answer questions. That's why it's called question period.
All right, we're now going to move. That concludes question and debate portion of the evening. We're now going to move on to closing statements from each of our candidates, and we're going in reverse order to where we started. So we're going to start with Ms. Thomson first.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. At least the snow is starting to melt. This election process is an extended job interview. So I want each of you to think about who is the best representative for you, and who can really fight for you the best. What platform is going to work the best for you, and which individual is going to represent you the best. As I said at the beginning, the NDP is the only party that has a platform that is for you, that is making sure that your life is going to be more affordable. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the electoral reform. We've also committed to eliminating the Senate, because in the mixed member proportionate representation system, you actually end up with more representatives. So rather than having unelected people make our decisions, we're going to have more elected people. And we're also committed to lowering the voting age to 16, because there are 16-year-olds that are more engaged in politics than some 45-year-olds that I know. I believe in Medicine Hat-Cardston-Warner. I believe in Medicine Hat. We have so much to offer the country and the world. And I would be honored to represent you, to fight for you, and to make your life better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Your closing statement?
It's been a pleasure to be here this evening. The People's Party of Canada is the newest and fastest growing party in the country, probably in the history of the country. We are a grassroots populist movement that puts people, Canadians, and Canada first. All of our policies are based on that fact. We can't help people from other countries without first helping our own. That's not conscionable. As long as we have seniors, we have veterans, we have First Nations without clean water, we have homeless, we have jobless, and we have an opioid epidemic in this country that needs to be dealt with. Until we can fix those problems, we need to keep Canadian taxpayer money in Canada. Once we get those fixed, then we can look at helping our neighbors. It's no different in our own homes. We don't throw the doors open to everybody that's in the community to just come in and help themselves. We look after our own families first, and then we help out. I'd like to talk about immigration a little bit. People have called me a racist because we want to limit the amount of immigration that's coming into the country. I'm an immigrant. Immigrant is not a race. I don't care what country people come from. I have a lot of colleagues in the People's Party that are from all different corners of the globe. At our recent convention, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with them. And they all had the same opinion as me. They came to Canada because Canada is Canada. They came here to make a better life for themselves. Their opinion, like mine, is people that come here need to be welcomed. They need to be looked after. They need to be integrated into our Canadian values, our Canadian culture. We have one.
Thank you. Mr. Motz, your closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you to the Chamber and for you as the audience for participating tonight. And I'd like to salute my fellow candidates for having the courage to express your views to make Canada better. I think tonight was very clear. What you saw was contrasting visions, two contrasting visions, not only for Canada, but for you. On one hand, you saw, and I've heard about promises, that if actually implemented, will cost you billions of dollars in increased taxes. It will cost you significant debt moving forward. And on the other hand, you heard of a vision, a balanced vision, a reasonable vision that will make Canada stronger, that will fight for Canadians. We as Canadians have expectations. We expect to be able to buy a house. If we work hard, we can buy a house. We can raise a family. We can save for retirement. We can care for our children and our aging parents. That hope is vanishing in this country. Why? Because of government and government regulations. You heard that there's only one party that is positioned to end the Liberal reign of reckless spending and debt and corruption and scandal. And that's the Conservative Party of Canada, with a principled leader in Andrew Scheer, with a bold vision for what this country needs. I have been honored to be your representative and serve and fight for you in Ottawa for the last 3 years, because I believe in the people and the businesses of this country, or of this riding. And I am hopeful that you will entrust me to be your representative again in Ottawa coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kirshenbaum?
First of all, you've been a great audience tonight. Thank you for being here and giving us the chance to go on at you at some length. Just very quickly before I summarize, I'd like to just rebut a couple of points. If we are talking about the opposition emerging as a new government that's reasonable and balanced and wanting to get out of the way, then where is their position? How do they justify that with their position on a woman's right to choose and on gay couples' rights? Both of these are critical issues that will fall apart under a conservative government. They've said that many times over. I have boiled this down. For me, the issue is leadership. I said it at the beginning, I say it now. It's how we look at the world and how the world looks at us if we are led by a leader with credibility and credentials rather than a guy who can't get a job selling insurance. We have,
Please.
it's really important that a leader has a reputation for truth.
I agree.
For me, my personal view is I'd rather have 4 more years of Justin Trudeau breaking the occasional promise than 4 years of Andrew Scheer keeping any of his. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
I didn't even call for applause yet. Aren't you a great audience? Okay, so we're done with the formal part of the debate. I'm going to go just a bit off script, at which point in time the person who wrote the script is going, what? Okay, so the reason I'm going off script is I think I'd like you to help me recognize your executive director, Lisa Kowalchuk. And she's going, what are you doing, Ken? She was recognized in May by her peers in the Chamber Network as the Alberta Chamber of Commerce Executive of the Year. But wait, there's more. She was also recognized at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce AGM 2 weeks ago, again by her peers nationally, as the Canadian Chamber of Commerce Executive of the Year. Congratulations, Lisa. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will conclude our event tonight. Please, before we go, I would like to bring up Sarah Mackenzie, the President of the Chamber of Commerce, to say a few words.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you guys all for being here this evening. I think it's super important to recognize that as Canadians, we're so blessed and so fortunate to be able to hold these kinds of forums. It's not everywhere in Canada now, or in the world, that you can do this, so I think that's great. And I applaud you all for putting your names forward and for doing this. It's definitely not an easy task. I'd like to thank you all here for joining us tonight for our 2019 Federal Election Forum. And I'd also like to acknowledge that it takes a significant amount of time and effort for candidates to allow their names to stand. So I'd like you, see, I already did this, so I'm just going to skip a paragraph here. Due to our limited time, we recognize that not all of our questions were asked, and we're sorry about that. If you would like to, you can connect with the candidates out in the lobby. They'll be outside for about another 30 minutes. And I'd like to give a special thank you to our moderator tonight, Ken Cobley. We are regularly asked in advance of our forums if Ken will be joining us, and it's always exciting for us to say that he will. We're so lucky to have his talent during the evening, your knowledge, your professionalism, your wit, generosity, and leadership. So thank you, Ken, for being here. Thank you as well to the Medicine Hat Lodge for hosting Ken and for helping us to ease the travel plans. I'd also like to acknowledge the staff of the Chamber of Commerce that are here this evening. Jenna and Caitlin, thank you for keeping us on time here with the clock. And as well, I'd like to thank Chat TV, who are streaming our forum and making it available on their website, as well as Shaw Communications is filming tonight's forum, and ComTV. The Chamber will also link any forum videos on our Vote Prosperity webpage. We hope that you've enjoyed this evening and you've found it useful and have been able to identify your candidate of your choice, who we will be sending to Ottawa on October 21st. If you have any information if you're requiring any information on polling stations, please visit Elections Canada website. And that's it. That's a wrap. Thank you, and join us out in the lobby.